So in today's video, we're going to look at developing strategies, but in fact, we're going to be a little bit more focused than that because we're going to look at entities whose prime objective isn't to turn a profit. So not-for-profits or public sector organizations. And we're going to begin with a hypothetical example. So I want you to say hello to Georgette. Now, Georgette is principal of a local high school. But there's another high school in the area, and Georgette has heard that they've been giving all their sixth form students computers. Because of this, a number of their students have gone on to prestigious universities studying programming and web development, and a number of people have asked Georgette why the same opportunities aren't being given to their students so they can go on to university. So Georgette decides to give the students laptops. But why? Is it increasing Georgette's profits? Is she interested in making profits? Well, no, she isn't. We're not dealing with a traditional organizational company like we do a lot in CIMA E2 and E3, where the strategy is all about making sure the organization or an entity ends up with a profit. This is a public sector organization. But nevertheless, public sectors and not-for-profits can also benefit from strategy development, although possibly the end result wouldn't be, or the end goal rather, wouldn't be the same as the organizations that we've been looking at. So now let's have a look at public sector and not-for-profit. Now, public sector organizations are owned by the state. That's why they're called the public sector. And because of this, it's the government who has the final say over their business activities. Now, they can be in a number of different forms. They can be state-owned industries or government-run departments. Now, in England, a very famous example of this would be the National Health System, which is run by the government, or the government is certainly answerable for it, or the Forestry Commission, which manages the UK's forests. Now, not-for-profits are slightly different because their aim isn't to make a profit. That's why they're called not-for-profits. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are not profitable. But in fact, what they prioritize is a service to their members rather than maximizing profit for the owners, which we would see in a traditional shareholding organization where really their priority is the shareholders. And examples of not-for-profits include trade unions, charities, cooperatives, mutual organizations, clubs and societies, and educational establishments. But remember, just because they're not-for-profit doesn't mean they're not interested in making profit, doesn't mean they don't have to turn a profit, but it's not their main goal. Because of this, though, both these organizations might have trouble setting objectives because their motives are really, really different from organizations who prioritize profits. They might have conflicting objectives, or their goals may be immeasurable. Now, by immeasurable goals, obviously with a profit organization, they can measure the profit they're making. Are we making money? Well, then, yeah, it's really easy to measure if they're doing well. But not-for-profits and public sector organizations, if they're not prioritizing profit, what criteria are they using to measure the success of the organization? So let's return to Georgette's school. Now, her school might aim to get a really high number of grades while also getting high staff satisfaction. Now, to get the high grades, it might mean the staff have to work day and night, working through their holidays, never having a sick day, feeling under pressure the whole time. So the students getting high grades might mean the staff satisfaction is suffering. And that means there's a conflict between the objectives of the organisation. Now, the lack of profit means that not-for-profit organisations set objectives in slightly different ways, and these are the 3E models: effectiveness, efficiency, and economy. And we'll look at an example of a hospital. So a hospital, for it to be effective. Now, a hospital's aim goal, of course, is to make sick people well again. So they could look at it maybe on recovery rates, how quickly are their patients recovering, the operation success rates, are people having to come back in for treatment, are operations going according to plan. And here we can see the organisation is seeing how effective it is and looking at different criteria to judge their effectiveness. The second of the 3Es are efficiency, making sure they are producing as efficiently as possible. So perhaps in a hospital's case, they would be reducing the length of operations by using new technology, or new technology to maybe be able to reduce staff numbers. That's making the organisation efficient, which is another way to measure their objectives. And the last of the 3Es is economy, making sure the organisation is operating as cheaply as possible. So in a hospital's case, they want to make sure the departments are ordering together. Maybe they could team up with other hospitals to make sure they're ordering in bulk to get the best value for the goods that they are buying. So there we go, a very brief rundown of how a hospital might look at objectives. Because they can't just measure cost, they are looking at 3 other ways to measure their objectives to make sure they can avoid conflict and to make sure their strategy is working as effectively as possible. Let's move on now. We're going to look at SMEs, which are small and medium-sized enterprises. Now, SMEs are put in this section of different contexts because simply of their size. They probably will have fewer resources and possibly less experience when they come to setting strategy and making sure their strategy is developing correctly. So their plans will be far simpler than with other organisations and obviously on a far smaller scale. Now, because they're so small, or because they're smaller, there's no real need to come up with extensive plans to make sure the changes are coordinated. Remember, we've talked about larger organisations having departments specifically for strategy, just because of the sheer scale of the operation. That wouldn't be necessary in SMEs. And what we also might see is that the goals of the company are or will be related to the goals of the owner, and not necessarily a host of different stakeholders, as we would see in much larger businesses. And they possibly wouldn't really be motivated simply by economic incentives either. There could be far more reasons while the owner is driving a business forward. So there we go, that's SMEs, just a very brief look there at strategy in different contexts. And hopefully it serves as a quick reminder that although when we're looking at strategies in our E2s and our E3s, they're normally linked to organisations whose main interest is to turn a profit, that there are situations where different strategies are called for because there's different situations. So there we go. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If so, if you want more information about E2 and E3, be sure to subscribe. Thanks very much.